What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Goose Knob Show. I'm just gonna storyboard an idea out here. So, I think that there is a severe dysfunction within our system, our social system. And I just want to try and characterize it so that we can figure out how to get around it. And I think essentially, one trend that I've been seeing, and you can see this in the book Bowling Alone, and I think by Putnam, and I guess just a lot of people have been kind of saying this, but there's been a severe lack of social trust in our society. And that's one thing I'd say. You know, kids used to, if you look at the average distance, kids used to like explore around their house or play outside. In like the 60s, I think it was like a mile away from their house. And then for the next few decades, it's just been decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. I think in the 2010s, it was just, like a few feet from their house. And then now I think kids don't really even go outside much. So, I mean, I don't really know the specific distances, but the point is, the trend is that, parents are, lack the trust of the outside world to the extent that you can see this in the fact that children are, less willing to go, further and further outside into society. And this could either be due to parents' overprotectiveness or a lack of social trust. I think it's kind of both. But that's one thing. I think in another sense, people don't really trust each other as much. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But I also think that it's not just a lack of trust. I think it's also, I guess since 2015 probably, people have begun to not only not trust people, but also fear others. And maybe that's the right way to put it. Maybe there's a different way. But I think that a trend that I've been seeing recently is much different than just a lack of trust. I think it's deeper. And I think it might be due to social media, or it might be due to something else. But I think what I've been seeing is that a lot of people people nowadays, especially in Gen Z, are afraid of others, like to a very unhealthy and large extent. And what I mean by that is, I think that what I've seen is that I think that people believe that there are more violently insane people out there than there actually are. I think that people nowadays are so afraid of others that they are unwilling to interpret the wide range of human expression charitably. I think that nowadays people, now more than ever, I think, people are afraid of anything that is outside a very, very narrow social norm, and anything that is seen outside of that is viewed as dangerous. And I believe that this is probably due to the internet, or at least, some tendrils of the internet, especially TikTok, I'd say, and also some of the social movements that we've seen. But I'll get into what that means specifically. But what I think is happening is, and I think this is also probably due to the post 2020 and everything that happened around then. But I think number one, people people are very detached from reality. People are very detached from reality because the web of misinformation that has kind of been skyrocketing since 2020 has, I think, put people into a place where they doubt basically everything in reality, and things that are actually happening. And if and in an attempt to have some footing in reality, if you just completely trust what news media and electronic web media is telling you, then you're going to be living in a very weird world. And I guess, to put it simply, nowadays more than any other time, I think that people, I think that what the news media is telling us is like pretty insane. And it's oftentimes, it's a lot of lies. And you could say, oh, well, that might sound like, oh, he's just a conspiracy theorist or whatever. But that's like, for example, like 2 years ago, if you were to say, oh yeah, well, maybe we should consider this, coronavirus as a lab leak, right? People, the people who listen to the news media in 2020, they would have said, oh, that's insane. You're a conspiracy theorist. Why are you even saying this? You're an evil, dysfunctional, unhinged person, right? And then when the news media is saying just that, oh, maybe it's a lab leak, right? Then everyone goes in lockstep with that, and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is reasonable. So people, they're very schizophrenic with respect to how they view the world, because if your viewpoints can change on a dime and you're not really if you're not really tethered to anything, and it's just based on the whims of what this apparatus is telling you, it's insane. And with respect to the news media, I think the reason why people are so unwilling to leave that little bubble of, the media sphere is because the alternative has been just so, if you don't believe exactly what the media is telling you, then you are a conspiracy theorist, then you are an evil right-winger, you are a nut job, you are insane and a violent threat to society, and you're stupid, and you are, you're worthless, and you're just disjointed from reality, and you're everything that society doesn't want you to be, if you don't listen to what the common narrative is. And most people, they don't want to be that, right? So they're going to be running away from anything that will make others perceive them as, being a social outcast or someone who others don't like. Most people, 80% of people, the sole thing that is governing their actions is how they're perceived by others. Everyone kind of, probably 99% of people, they care about what others think to an extent, but like for 80% of people, it's everything. Everything is how they're perceived. And anyway, I think that's what you kind of see. And I think this is especially, and I think that, well, just to highlight kind of where I'm going with this, this is only one small part. And you probably know this, but I'm probably going to go into an interesting, different direction in a second. But just to close off this point, I think that what's really interesting about this, and what really, how would you say it, really highlights this point, is I think the fact that, pretty tame public intellectuals or social figures are labeled as, basically being, undesirables, evil people, or someone who's like, oh, that person. And then, you see the person roll their eyes and say, oh yeah, this person's this person's an idiot. This person's, you should never listen to this person, right? I think what you see, I've, people say that Joe Rogan, if you say Joe Rogan, if you that'll elicit a groaning reaction from a lot of people. People will be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that idiot, that bumbling fool, that total conspiracy theorist nut job. It's like Joe Rogan's just like a normie. He just he says a lot of good stuff. He says a lot of interesting stuff, and he's more willing to say the truth. But it's really not that. A lot of what he says isn't really that groundbreaking and earth-shattering, right? But it's pretty tame stuff what Joe Rogan is talking about. But you see people in mass, basically saying, "Oh yeah, Joe Rogan, what a nut job," right? It's like the response to this innocuous, thinker is pure. How would you say it? I think vitriol, pure, just, venom. And the reason for that is that Joe is willing to kind of talk about things that are outside of, just a common narrative. And it's just interesting. It's interesting that one of the most, respected, thinkers or just public figures of our time elicits such a venomous reaction from a lot of people for the simple reason that, he's not plugged into the system. Anyway, so that's point one. The other interesting thing is I think that what I've noticed beyond just the, oh yeah, people who don't completely buy into the narrative are crazy. That's been a theme that has been pushed extremely heavily on all sides, to the point where even the most respected public figures are kind of seen as, insane, even though they obviously aren't. I think that you also see an immense amount of fear given any interaction between people. And what I mean by that is, I think nowadays people are very concerned and very scared that the majority of people around them are dangerous, insane, unhinged, and a threat to them. And I mean, if you walk around, if you talk to people, like most people are fine. Most people are normal. Most people are, not a threat to you. Most people are trustworthy, I would say. Most people are decent. But if you were to talk to any normal person nowadays, or any person, especially living in a city, the amount of trust, the amount of, belief that they have in maybe the goodness or the trustworthiness or the safety of others is, extremely low. Like, if you look on any dating app, for example, you'll see like a bunch of girls saying like, oh, please don't kill me. Please don't da-da, or like, oh, I just don't want to get killed by somebody. I don't want to get, murdered. I don't want to, it's like, and sure, I guess you're going to have to worry about that to an extent. Like, everyone should worry about, their own safety. Everyone should probably put precautions up to ensure that they don't, if they're put in a situation where, they might get mugged or, assaulted or whatever, that they have a plan for that, or, they can defend themselves. It's not a bad idea to, be prepared. But I think that what you're seeing, especially among, I think, women today, is a fear of that I think is much, that doesn't line up with how reality actually is. I think a lot of people are, way more afraid of reality than reality is actually dangerous, and people are actually dangerous. And I'm wondering why that is. And I have a few ideas. One idea is the TikTok phenomenon. And I think on TikTok, which I think is especially I think there's incredible danger in there. And I think this is the reason. I think you're seeing a rise in the spreading of mental illness, or at least the spreading of the perception of pervasive mental illness. What I mean by that is that on TikTok, any crazy person, any, unhinged nut job can have a voice. And I think oftentimes those people, they are able to, grow way bigger than others, because, there's just a novelty in it. There's a novelty in how crazy they are and how unhinged they are. And I think that what you see is that some of these people who are, insane, are just perceived more. But what you're also seeing is, I think that they're trying to, I don't know, there's some elements of, these crazy people who I think are also trying to feel like that their insanity isn't insanity. And in doing so, they're trying to make more people either accept that they're sane, or they're trying to make more people like them so that they don't feel as alone, or they feel like there's a quote community around them, quote unquote community. And anyway, take that however you want. But the point is, because of social media, the viewing of unhinged people, is much higher. And because of social media, and because of just media in general, the sensationalist things, the crazy things, the things that are not the norm, but the exception to the norm, are seen much, much, much more often than the norm actually is. You'll always see, you'll see things about school shootings. You'll see things about, people getting raped and killed and dying, and warfare and disease, and just, the world's going to end, everything's, over, blah, blah, blah. Sensationalist headlines. That's number one, which makes people think that the world is way more, scary and in a much more dire place than it actually is. And it makes people think that the world is much more dangerous than it actually is. Even though in the United States, crime has been going steadily down. You're seeing a lot of, society is actually a lot safer nowadays than it was in the past. But looking at news media, you're not going to think that. And I'd also say that, I don't know, on TikTok especially, maybe you're probably going to see more insane people per, minute of being on TikTok than you would see in the real world. But I think what you're also seeing is people who are ideologically motivated, or maybe just, maybe not even motivated at all, just, people telling stories. People tell stories about, horror stories, which get picked up by the algorithms because for the same reason that news media, promotes violent stuff or sensationalist stuff, just because it gets more eyeballs. And people tell horror stories about, things that have happened to them or things that happened to other people. And in doing so, people think that, scary things happen way more often, and people are way more untrustworthy than they actually are. you know you have like tons of TikToks where people say, oh, I had this boyfriend who abused me and da 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 da, or I went to here and then this guy did da 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 and did this and blah blah blah, or I did this and da da da. People, especially women, I think they especially share all these horror stories and they say, oh, da 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 da, men are crazy, men are evil, blah blah blah. You see this all the time. And I think one of the reasons is ideologically motivated because of feminism and blah blah blah, whatever, who cares. Also, I think that a lot of people nowadays use this ideology of men are evil or women are evil because maybe they've been screwed over by women or men or whatever, and then they kind of want a worldview to kind of reinforce that and say, oh, yeah, men are evil, women are evil because of blah blah blah. And you see these hateful ideologies kind of springing up on TikTok and other places because of trying to get back at things, trying to create a worldview that doesn't make you feel like you're getting hurt. And people with these ideologies will cherry pick the bad example of what happened to them, and in doing so it just reinforces and causes a positive feedback loop where people become like end up hating each other more and more and more. Like, for example, like you see a lot of like these videos on TikTok where women are saying, oh yeah, the guys did this and guys did that, and this is why I hate men, because men did this to me and men did that to me and blah blah blah. And in doing so, a lot of women who see these stories will be like, oh man, yeah, men are just evil because look at all these stories that tell me men are evil. It's like, okay, I can understand completely why you think that men are evil if these are all the stories that you're seeing. I'd also say that probably the hookup culture that exists today, and just women really do have it bad today. Women really do have it bad. I think just because our society is basically leaving them out to dry and is not imbuing them with the virtuous ethics and the tools that would allow them to, I wouldn't say be safe, but be that would protect them from the actual bad things in the world that are out there. And what you see, I think women are being pushed into colleges and these other institutions. And what they're told is, oh, you need to be a party girl. You need to always be happy. Everything is, about your personal happiness and about, going to parties and doing this and da da da. You need to get drunk. You need to do this. You need to have fun. You need to enjoy these young years while you still can. And in doing so, a lot of women are going into, a party environment where you have a bunch of, sex crazy frat guys who all they care about is, using you for your body, and and they have no sexual morality at all. And if you're in a confined area with people like that, what's the likelihood that you're going to find someone who's, a complete sociopath who doesn't care about, harming you, or doesn't care about, who only cares about sex as an end, and who ends up, like fucking raping you or doing something else or hurting you, right? The likelihood that you'll be the likelihood that you're going to be harmed in an environment like that is much higher than if you're, just being in a normal society, a normal world that isn't, somewhere like that, right? To put it simply, I think that the environments that a lot of women go into nowadays, or the men that a lot of women are going for, make them have a skewed perception of men that does not align with 95% of men, I would say. Because if you're going to a frat, right, the type of guy you're going to be interacting with is, probably going to be some, semi-sociopath who's trying to just use you, right? And if that's your only interaction with men, then of course you're gonna hate men, because it's like, whoa, yeah, men are just sociopaths who want to use me. Men are just crazy, or just evil guys who don't really care about who I am. All they care about is just material pleasure, right? And then you also have the hypergamy problem, right? Most women, especially being especially encouraged by the internet, most women are shooting for the top men in the top 5%, men in the top 10% or whatever, or maybe even smaller than that, right? The square root of the number of men out there are those are the ones attracting the 50% of the girls, right? And if you're in a situation like that as a man, if and you're in the top 5% and women are just kind of throwing themselves at you, then and if you're motivated by just having sex, as our current society encourages people, that's the morality, that's the ethic, just use people for sex, right? If you're in that top 5%, that'll lead you to probably develop a lot of sociopathic behaviors, because you're just being bombarded with partners, and you can use anyone as you wish, and you don't need to see them as people, you just need to see them as a means to the end. And so essentially what happens is you have a lot of women who are just shooting for a bunch of the top 5%, which oftentimes is a bunch of sociopaths, because of how our society currently works, how social media and other kind of internet systems kind of have kind of molded us to be. So I think a lot of women, and maybe it's just 10%, maybe it's just a small percent of women, but a lot of women, they end up, I think, getting a perception of men from, or they have a picture of what a man is from these, really dysfunctional and corrupt places, because they're shooting for the top 5%, or because they're going to parties and they're, interacting with men there, right? Or they're interacting with men in, places where, virtue and morality aren't exactly, cornerstones. And let's say, even if it's a small number of women who are exposed to these areas, or a small number of women who are, being, hit up by, sex crazy guys online or whatever. These women, who, if you're interacting with guys enough times who are like this, you're probably going to get burned in some way, or you're probably going to get screwed over, or whatever, or maybe the worst thing could happen, right? And in doing so, in being in that environment, or in in talking with these people, you're going to start picking up a bunch of, horror stories. And I think that because of, the ideology of modern feminism, which is really us versus them type of thing, which is really bad. It's like, it should not be men versus women. We should be working together. But that's what I think has spoken to a lot of women, because they think that, they've been burned by men so many times that they think, oh man, these men are a threat. And they modern feminism is kind of, spoken to them. So what happens is I think you have a lot of women say, telling these stories on the internet, telling people, oh man, yeah, men burned me, men hurt me, men did this, men did that, men did all these horrible things to me. And you have a lot of women who are listening, because, this content also gets viral tons of times. Women listen, and then they, even if they weren't in this environment, that led to this, they will, they will get a view of reality that is, really dark, really scary, really, really just, horrifying. And I think what you see is, as an effect, I think people believe that insanity, that, a lack of morality, that the predatory people are much more numerous than there actually are. And in doing so, I think a lot of people, instead of looking at every individual as an individual, they've kind of laid a blanket kind of net or firewall out there and said, most people are probably predators, and I need to, be really, really hyper vigilant against that. And I think I think people are much less willing to be vulnerable or open to others, or give people the benefit of the doubt. And they also are much less willing to, see someone who isn't, a cookie cutter safe person, as someone who should be, interacted with as a person. What I mean by that is I think people nowadays have an idea of, this is what a safe person is. A person who listens to the news, who basically believes everything the news says, a person who believes in my political viewpoints, and a person who is, just people, like, a lot of people want this kind of neutered, weak, well, let's just look at women. I think a lot of women want like a neutered, weak man who won't hurt them, because they view the world as, being this, very, dangerous place. And, for fair enough, I think to an extent it is, right? But I think that they go in the opposite direction, and they think, what, I don't ever want to be hurt like these other people have been hurt, or like I've been hurt. So I want someone who can not hurt me at all. And in doing so, I think that also leads to a terrible positive feedback loop, because, the people who are the weakest are also the most dangerous oftentimes, and, well, that feedback loop is also a huge problem as well, because I think, the people who will harm you the most are going to be these weak people, because they can't, because weak people have very little morality, I think. Weak people are motivated by their carnal instincts, or maybe, these bizarre kind of ideologies. And in doing so, like, for example, look at the creative Rick and Morty. Didn't he like sexually assault people and, beat his wife or whatever? It's like, this guy was like a clear parroter of what modernity wants you to think, right? And he ended up, being one of the most egregious examples of what not to do, right? So I think you see this positive feedback loop. Women especially think that, what, I need to protect myself because this is happening to so many other women, or it's happened to me. And then instead of, doing what they should be doing, which is like, looking for strong people, they end up kind of looking for going to the same people who are going to hurt them the most, like the top 5% of guys, right? Or the weak men, and well, in doing so, I think they're just going back to their, basic evolutionary biology, because they're not really being directed in a better direction. People aren't giving them a better roadmap. They're saying, you should. No one's telling them what to do, so they're just going back on their basic evolution, which is hypergamy, right? And hypergamy is going to lead them to be burned even more. So that's example one. Or they're going back on, social conventions of the modern day. And I think that the problem there is, well, like the ideologies that we see today. So the issue is, how do we? I think we need a better narrative. We need a better kind of worldview. Maybe not worldview, but just, a story that we tell ourselves. Because the current story that I think a lot of people, well, I think a lot of women are accepting is a story where men are evil and women are in this eternal battle against, the oppressive forces of men. And men will probably hurt you, so you need to like steer clear of them. And fair enough. If this is what you're seeing on your social media that you're on, 6 hours a day, if this is what you're seeing at the parties you go to, if this is what you're seeing in the, in the guys you're shooting for, it makes sense. And, that's the worldview. But I think if we start, saying an alternative that, the world isn't all about just, having fun. Parties are probably, what's better than a dumb house party where you have 50 people and everyone's trying to, get super blackout drunk and, trying to use hardcore drugs and all this crap, right? Maybe what's better is, a simple, small thing where you're trying to, get to know people better, a party where it's not dangerous for you, where it's, it's people that and maybe some other people on the periphery. And, it's more something that's, a social gathering rather than a rabid kind of frenzy in an attempt to have fun, a hedonistic parties shouldn't be hedonistic. They should be fulfilling. Maybe that's number one. And the world isn't about happiness at its core. It's about fulfillment. It's about building something, right? Maybe that's the way to, if we have a system that kind of encourages that rather than encouraging, just nihilistic hedonism, well, I think that would help a lot of people out. And, well, anyway. At the end of the day, I think people are very afraid of others. People are very afraid that, the individuals around them are going to be crazy, going to be insane, going to be someone who's going to hurt them. Because of, these different positive feedback loops. And I think the tragedy in this is that the diversity of human expression is being kind of trampled out, or because if you're trying to be expressive, if you're kind of, if you're showing your true colors and you're, if you're showing, the quirks of who you are and all that stuff, I feel like, in the past that would have been fine. And people would have been like, oh yeah, this is a human being. And this person has these interesting traits and all that stuff, And I think people would have been more willing to listen to who you are and to, and, give you the benefit of the doubt. But I think nowadays, given the fact that people are so adversarial or so scared of others and have been fed to so many horror stories and everyone's being put into a little box, and since our society is becoming, it seems like our society is becoming very shame-based in that our social, everyone around us kind of keeps us in check and tells us who we should be, Anyway, that's actually, we'll get into the shame versus guilt-based societies, but that's another thing. But the point is, people nowadays, I think, are less willing to embrace the diversity of human expression and prefer a much simpler was it prejudice maybe, or maybe prejudice is the word for it, but people want a simple view of how things are going to work. They want a simple kind of equation that defines who you are. And because people fall back on a very simple worldview and a simple ideology to explain human behavior that's reinforced by social media and by ideology. The view, the limits of acceptable human behavior are extremely narrow, or extremely small nowadays, I think. The limits of acceptable human thought, 100 years ago was like wide. You could think about like a bunch of different thoughts, and you could be like, oh, maybe this, maybe that, And nowadays, like if you say the wrong word, if you say the wrong phrase, if you think the wrong thing, then, you'll be canceled or whatever, right? And I think that that's led to, that's probably step one. People, they can't think as many things. But I think the greater tragedy is it's not just the limits of human thought. It's also the limits of human behavior and expression. People are no longer allowed to express, different things, to be different people. The acceptable person is much, more narrow. And I feel like in an attempt to not get hurt, people are like, oh, you know what? This archetype is the safe archetype. This archetype is the is the one that is not going to hurt me. And everyone else, is, maybe they're okay, but I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to get hurt. And yeah. So you can no longer really be yourself anymore. You can no longer take as many risks to an extent with who you are as a person. Because if you do, the hard thing to do is to listen, to say, this person doesn't really fit into a mold, or maybe this person fits into a mold that might be, oh, it's a red flag, blah, 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 whatever. The hard thing to do is to give them the benefit of the doubt. The easy thing to do is to instantly categorize them and then, move on to someone who's the perfect ideal or whatever, because you're afraid. And well, I don't know. I think that there's some things that, as a society we need to start working on. And I think, I don't know, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different ways of approaching this, but I think maybe one of them is, I don't know, maybe listening to people, maybe viewing the dignity of every individual first and foremost. I think people need to start trusting each other and accepting the risk that brings, but not in a naive way. We need to start trusting people, but also being, capable of accepting the risk that brings, and being able to, take on the risk in a safe manner. For example, let's say I meet a new friend, and let's say I'm like, okay, well, this friend might be, cool, or maybe he's a sociopathic serial killer. Okay, Maybe he's a sociopathic serial killer. Okay, then what do you do in that situation? What if you're afraid that someone's a serial killer? Which I think a lot of people are actually way more afraid of that than is actually the case. I don't think there's that many serial killers running around, but I feel like if you were to psychoanalyze people, I feel like a lot more people are scared of that than they should be. Anyway, point being, let's say you're afraid of people being serial killers, right? But you should probably, be willing to interact with people, be more vulnerable, be more, willing to engage in others' humanity, right? But you're afraid that they're serial killers, right? How do you manage that? Well, why don't you carry a knife or carry a concealed carry gun legally, of course? Or how about you are able to, be someone who can engage in physical combat, or, have some teeth, have some teeth. And also know that as humans, we aren't just fragile little glasses. We're not just a vase that can be easily knocked over. We're built to withstand an incredible amount of disease. We're built to withstand warfare. We're pretty robust and resilient beings, and we've lived in basically a metropolitan bubble for most of our recent history, which makes us think that we're not as strong and we're not as resilient as we actually are, right? But I think one of the key steps towards actualization is acknowledging that, we're frail to an extent, but we're also resilient. Acknowledging that, that we should probably reach out a hand in trusting people, but know that there's a risk in the danger of others, And I think that the way to do that is just to increase our ability to be resilient, increase our ability to be self-sufficient, self-reliable, right? If you're going to interact with somebody, if you're going to put yourself out there more, also make sure you have teeth. If you're going to put yourself out there more, know how to defend yourself, or know how to, see the warning signs if someone's crazy or something like that, Get educated. We have an immense number of tools at our disposal to ensure that we don't get burned, How about instead of, relying on a simplified ideology, just, get a better understanding of humanity, and be willing to have a life in a world that you live in that doesn't fit into the cookie cutter box that you think it will be, Maybe one of your best friends is going to be someone who isn't what you think they'll be like. Maybe, or maybe not, but I think we need to be more willing to accept that people are complex and and that being super safe about everything is really not a good strategy. Is not a good solution. If you're trying to wrap yourself in bubble wrap, and you're trying to be super safe, and you're trying to I need to do the safe thing. I got to do the thing that doesn't hurt me. I got to do the thing that will be blah blah blah. What that leads to is a life that is actually the most dangerous and the most unstable, I think. That'll lead to a life of, or or more likely than that, it's going to lead to a life that's average and bland and boring and unfulfilling. Because life isn't safe. You're going to die. And the true limits of fulfillment, the true, the way to get the most out of life isn't to be the safe, isn't to, live in a comfort zone. It's to get outside of the comfort zone. It's to be in an unexplored territory, and to see what the limits of expression of being are. It's not to, be in this comfortable little bubble where everything is safe and the people around you are all, everyone's exactly what I thought they would be. Everyone's adheres to this little dumb little ideology that I believe that'll try and keep me safe and blah, blah, blah. If you do that, then you're going to get burned in your own way. As I said before, just going back, the ideology of this feminism where you hear the horror stories of men, right? And you're like, okay, well, how do I solve this problem? Then I'm just not going to interact with men who could hurt me. I'm going to interact with weak men. That's number one. And if you interact with weak men, then you're going to be interacting with the most dangerous men out there, right? Or you're going to be like, oh, I don't want to be bored. I don't want to be in an environment where everything is, safe, not even safe. I don't want to be, or you have the alternative where it's like, what, I want to have fun. I want to be, reveling and whatever. Then you end up interacting with, the top 5% or whatever. No, actually, that's the wrong viewpoint. Anyway, you have hedonism. You put yourself into bad environments and then you get burned in anyway, right? Or you don't really try and, think about who you're interacting with deeply, and you kind of get trapped in the social media environment. And as a woman, you end up, shooting for the top 5% of guys, and you get burned like that, right? So I think, and these all come from very simplified ideological worldviews, right? If you're going based on the pure kind of ideology, kind of Darwinian evolution, and you're just falling back on that, base level hypergamy that would have worked. Maybe it would have worked, thousands of years ago on the plains of the Middle East, right? But it doesn't really work now. Having a harem and polygamy, it's an atrocious system. So falling back on your base biology is not good. Falling back on nihilistic hedonism is not good. Falling back on feminism is not good. You can't fall back on a simplified reality. You need to have a robust system of virtue. If you're going to sort people, you can't sort them based on something simple. Like, oh, he's in the top 5%. Oh, he's having fun. Oh, he's weak. It needs to be something robust. Is he a genuinely good person? Does this person love others? Does this person, is he someone who is conscientious, who thinks about the future, who is competent? That's what matters. These little stupid little simplifications of reality, ideological simplifications of reality, will lead to nothing but being, eaten up by this world. And I think, people need to be more willing to accept the complexity of reality rather than living in a simple, safe world. Anyway, that was a big mouthful, but I hope some of this worked, or hope some of you guys are still listening. But anyway, I shall talk to you guys later. Peace.